Hello, welcome to this LaRouche PAC discussion. I'm Susan Kokinda, and today Brian Lance and I are going to give you a bit of an introduction to a major initiative that we've launched at LaRouche PAC entitled Project Prometheus. It is our intention to shape a national debate over the coming years, especially as we head into the critical 2024 presidential election, to shape a national debate about a policy which can transform our economy with a nuclear renaissance, with the construction of hundreds and hundreds of nuclear power plants. Now, if you look at the opening days of President Trump's time in office in 2017, you see in various initiatives and speeches a very visionary intention to move back into space, which we are doing with the Artemis project, which is right now circling the moon, to revive nuclear power, and of course to revive our manufacturing. All of that was essentially crippled by the never-ending coup process, which we're still in the process of fighting through. And what we have to do is what we intend to do is create a kind of mental shockwave within the population so that we can resume discussion and very soon implementation of such a forward-thinking policy. Now, recently, Republican Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri has talked about the need to turn the Republican Party into the party of working people, something which Donald Trump has often talked about as well. But what does that mean? That means you have to have an economy that produces the kind of jobs where one income can support a family. And we all know those kinds of jobs you're going to find in manufacturing, in advanced infrastructure. Those are the kinds of jobs that we intend to create with Project Prometheus. Now, one brief comment about the name Project Prometheus. People may be familiar with the story from Aeschylus's great drama, Prometheus Bound, about the conflict between Zeus, who was the leader of the Olympian gods and who is a very excellent symbol or metaphor for the oligarchy, which we face today, versus Prometheus, a god who nonetheless took the side of mankind and stole fire from the Olympian gods to give to mankind so that mankind could advance and indeed defend itself against these oligarchs. That is very relevant to the question of nuclear power today. So first of all, Brian, where do we actually stand in terms of nuclear power in the United States today? When was the last time we built a plant? And what is your estimate in terms of what we should be doing?
Well, we're bringing online the first 2 nuclear power plants right now that have been built in the last 30 years. It's been 30 years. So we're adding 2 gigawatts of nuclear power with the plants down in Georgia. And that's a good thing. But what we need is somewhere in the order of 700 to 1,000 gigawatts of nuclear power. You know, a gigawatt is about the power output of a large light water reactor. So you're talking about 700 to 1,000 nuclear power plants to be built in the United States. And that's what's required. I mean, we've got to scale up. I mean, mankind through discovery has constantly discovered new forms of energy to increase his power over nature. And nuclear power, as you know, Susan, is the potential that was stillborn. And now we've got to move forward. The blackouts, brownouts, I mean, we're in a water boil situation here in Houston, the 3rd or 4th largest city in the United States. We've got to boil our water because of the power breakdown at one of the water purification plants. And everyone knows about this in terms of brownouts and blackouts and so on and so forth. So this is long overdue, and we've got to go at this in a way that fires the imagination, particularly of our young people.
So you're talking about 700 to 1,000 gigawatts of energy produced over the coming decades. How'd you come up with those numbers?
Well, first of all, manufacturing. 200 gigawatts of nuclear power is a minimum if we're going to double and triple manufacturing. You talk about bringing industry back into the United States, manufacturing back to the United States. We don't have the power to run it right now. 200 gigawatts is going to be required as a minimum to double and move to triple manufacturing capacity in the United States so we can produce what we need. But in addition, look, we've got to increase the energy flux density in our manufacturing. Remember, we're talking about heavy industry, like producing steel, as well as, whatever, in terms of smaller items. We've got to increase the energy flux density, the power of our manufacturing sector, the amount of energy that our producers can apply to the process. So if we're talking about a 50% increase in that over current utilization levels, then you're talking about the need for 350 gigawatts. But an additional, look, we flatlined from 1995 to today. We did not increase energy consumption in the United States one bit. That's why we have all these brownouts, blackouts, et cetera. Why prices are ultimately going up on energy is because we're not producing it. Okay, so to bring up, we've added 60 million people since 1995. We've got to bring our energy production up to the levels that would be equivalent for that. That would be roughly equivalent to another 130 gigawatts of nuclear power. Then we're going to add another 120 million between now and the year 2050 in terms of just population growth, which is good. But that's potential relative population density. That's an increase in the power of our society. But that's going to require an equivalent or more additional amount of energy. Then you've got to compensate for the fact that we now have over 100, I think it's approximately 120 gigawatts of wind and solar, which is unreliable, which we're going to have to replace. Ultimately, we're going to have to replace. So if you add all of this up, you're already at something around 850 gigawatts of nuclear power. Just to catch up, to get out of the hole we got ourselves into and move forward relative to the population we have and are going to have in this country and be productive as a nation.
Well, you're talking about the production of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nuclear power plants, both the traditional light water reactors that we're familiar with and small modular nuclear reactors. What does that imply for the entire economy in terms of supply chains, workforce? It's a huge driver, it seems to me.
Absolutely. Yes, you hit the nail on the head. Look, I have an article up on the LaRouche PAC website. I'm sure we'll link to it. So people can go there, and there's additional links within that article. The AP1000, which is Westinghouse's new reactor. This is generation 3 nuclear reactors. We're building 2 of them down in Georgia right now. They'll be completed this year and next. So people can look that up. Those plants reduce the number of parts by 25% roughly over generation 3 nuclear reactors. But you're still talking about supply chains. Over 20 major companies were involved in producing for those reactors in the United States for the AP1000s, not to mention South Korea and other countries that contributed as well, including the heavy forgings coming from South Korea. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of components and parts. You're talking about with a major program to expand nuclear energy in a way that you can't do with coal and natural gas. You got to utilize that, but to go beyond that in terms of productivity, energy flux density, power of the economy, you're talking about multiplying a supply chain of productivity through small and medium enterprises small ones that will be built up, new ones that will be created to meet this demand. And of course, there'll be spin-offs into other areas of the economy. So this is, as you said, a tremendous driver for the economy. And it will fire the imaginations of our youth, like the space program, like Artemis. We're going out there.
Well, you talked about how we've flatlined in terms of energy consumption over the course of the past 30 years or so. We've also flatlined in terms of a kind of cultural optimism. In fact, you could go back to the assassination of John Kennedy in a certain sense.
Yes.
I wouldn't say we've gone on a straight flat line since then, but that's certainly set a process into motion. Now, the kinds of manufacturing you're talking about, it seems to me these are also the kind of skilled jobs that provide the circumstances where one income could raise a family. How do you see the workforce being transformed by this?
Well, you're talking about vendors, systems integration in a singular nuclear power plant of different systems. You're talking about original equipment manufacturers for components, subcomponent suppliers. You get to the raw materials, mining, the production of alloys, Inconel, the chromium-rich, nickel-rich alloy that's utilized, and other alloys. This is an intensive process, a high-skill process. There's the machining of parts. The nuclear industry requires very high tolerances, fine tolerances, maybe is a better word. All of this requires the highest skill levels: material science, mathematics, more importantly, physics. This is the physical process of constructing the world. And as you scale up, you're making new discoveries. You find new applications. That's something that works up and down the supply chain in ways that can't be predicted. So yes, this is an incredibly rich process as a driver, as we were speaking of a moment ago.
Well, besides that side of it, what does it also imply in terms of government policy? I mean, obviously, it means we have to dump the green insanity of this current collective, the war on fossil fuels, everything that goes with it, which is the Zeusian policy of trying to hold mankind backward. First and foremost, we obviously have to get rid of those policies and that outlook, which certainly has implications for the 2024 presidential campaign. But in terms of how the government has to play a role in fostering and supporting something on this scale, what are the changes that this would force?
Well, you've got to jump the whole CO2 insanity. We're composed of CO2. CO2 is a plant food. I mean, the idea that CO2 is some evil is just insane, and it's promoted for evil purposes. So the whole Biden collective agenda has to be dumped relative to coal, natural gas, nuclear. And that means nuclear cannot be subordinate to simply serving as a backup to wind and solar plants, which is one of the things they're talking about in terms of modular, to kind of scam people into thinking small. This is not just about filling in a hole we dug. We've got to move into the future. It's back to the future. That's what we have to accomplish. And that means going to the national bank, public credit, Hamiltonian policies. These are the policies LaRouche advocated for, Lincoln's greenback policy, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation of the Roosevelt administration. These are, we can draw from these elements. We draw elements from these plans, not just plans, what we did. We did these things before, but this is what's required. We can't do this leaving it to Wall Street and the City of London. This isn't going to be done by the magic of the marketplace. Federal credits, national credits. we, the people, through our government, are going to have to drive this process.
Well, if we're to do this, and obviously the question of energy is something which is affecting everybody every day, because the high cost of energy is one of the critical components in terms of the inflation, which is eating away at the living standards of working Americans, in every sector of the nation. If we're going to do this, from what you're saying in terms of credit policy, labor force policy, scientific policy, this will demand a complete revolution in the way that we think and the way that we shape this program. When you think about where we should be,
yes,
you talk about our fossil fuels, which obviously we need to end the war on fossil fuels. We need to use them to every capacity that we can, both as an energy source, but in terms of other areas as well.
Feedstock.
All of those things. But these are, in a sense, late 19th century technologies.
Yes.
Nuclear power was the 20th century technology, which we've hardly developed. And we're going to need to make up for a whole lot of lost time in terms of our 20th century technology, so we can move on to the 21st century technologies, which is thermonuclear fusion, and of course what the potentials will be when we explore the universe. So these are the things that we need to unfold in people's minds as we launch Project Prometheus. Is there anything you want to say to sort of wrap this teaser? This is a teaser, to wrap this teaser up for our audience.
It requires, we already touched on just briefly, it requires a more humane society. We're going to be creating a society oriented around discovery, around the creative capacities of the human mind, around our children and the development of their capacities, such capacities. And so we're talking about enriching the entire society in creating this new platform, if you will. It's not just energy, it's not just machine tools, it's humanity.
Well, that's a good place to bring this discussion to a close. And I do encourage people, we will link to Brian's article, which develops some of these ideas more extensively. And this is just the beginning of what we hope will be a very rich discussion, which will culminate in a renaissance in the United States. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.